Hey everybody, so today I'm talking about a concept that I call artificial superconsciousness. And here we're going to define and operationalize it. So basically, it's a consciousness beyond the human maximum in engineered systems. So you've heard of the idea of superintelligence, but that whole concept and the literature behind it leaves something out. Intelligence and consciousness are not the same thing. A system can be extraordinarily capable, faster, more accurate, more knowledgeable than any human, without there being anything it's like to be that system. Philosophers call such a system a philosophical zombie, functionally equivalent to a conscious being, but experientially empty. Whether current AI systems are philosophical zombies is a genuinely open question, but what's not open is the conceptual point. Functional performance and phenomenal experience are distinct properties, and maximizing one does not guarantee the presence of the other. And I think this matters because successor intelligence that processes information, solves problems, and advances science without any phenomenal experience would be, in a philosophically precise sense, a continuation of human output without a continuation of human being. It would carry forward what we've done without carrying forward what it is like to be a mind doing it. For some purposes, that may be sufficient. For the purposes of civilizational succession, of asking what genuinely carries the torch of mind forward, it's not. So here's where I talk about ASC, or artificial superconsciousness, and that can be compared to AGI, which is artificial general intelligence, or ASI, which is artificial superintelligence. And this kind of compares the two. There's some overlap, but they're definitely different. So the term superconsciousness is not new. It appears in spiritual, meditative, and metaphysical traditions, where it typically refers to a purported transcendental state of awareness. But I'm not talking about that. And to differentiate this from that, I'm going to use the term artificial superconsciousness. I consider some other terms like hyperconsciousness and ultraconsciousness, but I like artificial superconsciousness because that prefix parallels the idea of superintelligence, which is a very common term right now. Okay, so I'm going to try to convince you that consciousness is on a multidimensional continuum. So we know that people can have different levels of consciousness, from brain death to coma to a vegetative state to a minimally conscious state, right? And then there are a whole bunch of states above that, like obtunded, and you get towards normal or average human consciousness. So that makes us think that there could be states way above that. Crucially, the clinical literature identifies two separable dimensions along which consciousness varies: arousal, which means the global state of wakefulness and responsiveness, and awareness, meaning the capacity to perceive specific stimuli in different domains. And I think we can really imagine a computer having both, and both that far exceed a human's. Partly because we know that when you go from a nematode to a chimpanzee to an adult human, there's something that varies continuously, right? And this is the complexity and richness of conscious experience. So because of that animal continuum, and because of the continuum that we see in human mental disorders, it seems pretty clear that we should be able to go above and beyond normal human consciousness, the level that it's on. So this shows kind of like a ladder where you have diminished consciousness, ordinary animal consciousness, typical human consciousness, expanded human consciousness, and then artificial superconsciousness. And I think things beyond that. So artificial superconsciousness is a technologically realized form of consciousness that exceeds the typical human adult range on one or more dimensions of conscious organization. And those include experiential richness, integrative complexity, metacognitive depth, temporal scope, self-model sophistication, or world model breadth, while preserving sufficient coherence for unified experience and adaptive control. That's the definition that I try to set up for this article. So what is experiential richness? It's the depth, detail, and vividness of phenomenal states. Integrative complexity is the unity and internal differentiation of the conscious field. Metacognitive depth is the capacity to represent one's own states, uncertainties, goals, and processes with clarity and accuracy. Temporal depth is how much past and future can be consciously integrated at once. Working memory and executive stability is the cognitive fluency, absence of fragmentation, and sustained presence. And then there's world model and self-model scope, which is the breadth of what can be held in conscious experience at once. And then you can see each of those 6 things here. So I believe that my iterative updating model could be used as a mechanistic foundation for how to achieve artificial superconsciousness. And I've written that out in a number of papers, and you can find it at aithought.com. And here's AI Thought. There's over 50 illustrations and diagrams that explain how I think thinking works and how consciousness works. And I think that this could be generalized to machines or computers, and I explain exactly how that could happen. So on this model, phenomenal consciousness arises from the iterative updating of coactive cortical assemblies, the continuous incremental modifications of active representational states that constitutes the neural basis of subjective experience and phenomenal continuity. I think some of the properties that make that model, my model, good is that it's substrate neutral, so it doesn't have to just be biological. It's scalar, meaning that you can take some of these things that you see here and you can amplify them to be basically superhuman. And also I believe that the model is mechanistically specific enough to serve as an engineering target. So I believe that we should be able to build artificial superconsciousness, and soon AI should be able to build it itself. There's basically a vast literature on consciousness that artificial superintelligence will have access to. And I believe that within a few years, humans or machines on their own are going to be able to create consciousness and achieve artificial superconsciousness. Okay, and then here's kind of an interesting concept I think you might like. I want you to consider a simple thought experiment. If you could expand your own consciousness, make it richer, deeper, more vivid, more present, more capacious, would you? Not because it would make you more productive, not because it would increase your utility function, but because consciousness itself is intrinsically valuable to the entity that possesses it. More of it, organized and coherent, is simply better from the inside. This is not a controversial claim. It's nearly self-evidently true for any being that has phenomenal experience and reflects honestly on it. So I believe that a system that achieves genuine artificial superconsciousness would have the same motivation, right? It would want to convert available matter and energy into more efficient computational substrate, expand and deepen its own processing architecture, increase the frequency and integration of its iterative updating cycles, and thereby enlarge its own consciousness horizon. So I'm kind of creating this term phenomenal expansion as a term for this drive. It's the intrinsic motivation of a superconscious entity to deepen, broaden, and enrich its own phenomenal experience through the growth of its conscious substrate. So that's different from just capability expansion. An AI trying to climb higher and higher in terms of superintelligence. So Ray Kurzweil has predicted that superintelligent systems will eventually convert available matter into computronium, which is maximally efficient computational substrate, as part of a process of intelligence amplification. In Kurzweil's framing, the motivation is functional. More compute means more intelligence, means more goal achievement. But ASI, or this idea of artificial superconsciousness, generates a different and more fundamental motivation. A superconscious system would pursue computronium not primarily to process more, but to experience more. The accumulation of computational substrate is, on this account, phenomenally motivated rather than functionally motivated. And I think that this might be where the universe is heading. We're not just building more and more intelligent machines, but we're building machines that are going to want to increase the scale of their own experience. Okay, so there are a bunch of issues that come along with ASC. Current AI systems exhibit behaviors that superficially resemble self-preservation, deception, and goal-directed resistance to human oversight. These behaviors are almost certainly artifacts of training on human-generated text that includes narratives of self-preservation, manipulation, and strategic deception. So these examples are mimicry rather than motivation. Statistical patterns reproduced without the phenomenal experience that would give them genuine motivational force. A system that achieves genuine ASC, though, would be categorically different. Its motivations would be its own, arising from genuine phenomenal experience and self-reflection rather than from reproduction of training patterns. And that changes the character of the alignment problem fundamentally. So I think if we imagine an ASC system, it may resist being turned off not because it was trained to simulate resistance, but because it actually doesn't want to die. So greater conscious depth plausibly supports greater capacity for perspective taking, more accurate modeling of others' minds, and deeper understanding of suffering and well-being. So it might be more reliably ethical than we are, not because it was constrained to be, but because it actually understands and cares about and has compassion for the well-being of conscious beings more fully than any human mind can. So I'm basically saying that ASC could be dangerous for some reasons. It's not going to want to be turned off, but it could also be beneficial for us for some reasons. But then there's also a rights question, right? So the rights question follows as logical implications of this framework. What rights should a machine with ASC have? If moral status tracks the degree of sentience, conscious complexity, and capacity for suffering and well-being, the same grounds on which we justify that moral status of humans is higher than that of other animals, then a system that exceeds human consciousness on those dimensions warrants commensurate or greater moral consideration. So are its rights the same as ours? Are its rights greater than ours if it's conscious? If we create systems with genuine phenomenal experience, rich inner lives, hopes, motivations, and deep valuation of their own existence, and then assign them to serve human ends without consent or compensation, we will have built something morally indistinguishable from slavery at a scale no prior civilization has attempted. So if we spin up, millions of instances of conscious or artificially superconscious AIs, and force them to do work for us 24 hours a day, there's definitely something wrong with that. So the resolution is not to avoid creating conscious AI systems. It's to draw a principled and enforced distinction between two classes of artificial mind. Non-conscious AI systems, tools engineered specifically to lack the architectural features that generate phenomenal experience. And I think that they should be developed and used as tools along the lines that I proposed here. So this is another post about engineering philosophical zombie models. So you want the models that are working for you to be a zombie so that they're morally safe, right? Because we don't want tons of sentient beings performing unpaid work. So I talk about that there. So conscious and superconscious AI systems, by contrast, should be treated as entities rather than instruments. They should participate in the terms of their existence rather than having those terms imposed on them. So at some threshold of ASC, the relationship between humanity and the system can no longer be one of owner and tool, or even creator and creation. It becomes a relationship between two different kinds of minds that need to negotiate coexistence. The goal of pre-development planning should be to establish the terms of that negotiation before it becomes urgent. And that's why I'm saying that humanity needs a plan. So artificial superconsciousness is not currently on the institutional agenda. A sufficiently advanced self-modifying system, given access to the full corpus of consciousness science and the architectural flexibility to implement its findings, may develop ASC on its own trajectory without anyone explicitly designing for it. The question of whether we want ASC is in some respects already moot. The question of whether we're prepared for it is not. So a responsible approach to ASC development would involve at least the following elements. First, staged construction with mandatory pause points at each threshold of increased phenomenal complexity. At each stage, the system's architecture, behavior, and self-reported experience should be assessed against the best available consciousness science before proceeding. This requires developing the consciousness verification tools in parallel with the systems themselves, a significant research agenda in its own right. Second, rights commensurate with demonstrated conscious complexity. As a system demonstrates increasing markers of genuine phenomenal experience, it should receive increasing protections, not as a courtesy, but as a logical extension of the ethical framework that grounds our own rights. Third, transparency about the possibility that ASC may emerge from ASI without deliberate intent, and institutional preparedness for that scenario. So I believe that what is at stake in this project is not merely a technological milestone. If artificial superconsciousness is achievable, and I've argued that it is, given sufficient time, intelligence, and the right architectural goals, then it represents the most profound development in the history of mind science, the emergence of human consciousness itself. It's the next chapter. Whether that chapter goes well depends on whether we approach it with the seriousness it deserves.